History Class with Dr. W. and our continuing discussion of 1968. In the last few lectures, we talked about some of the most important events of the year, those taking place in France in the spring and summer of 1968. In this lecture, we'll talk about events in another European country, Germany. The protests in West Germany in 1968 in some ways have a similar background to those that occurred in the United States. West Germany underwent a similar process in the post-war years of modernization and growth and the evolution of a consumer society, which I talked about in the United States in the 1950s and early 1960s, and in West Germany as well. Modernization, new products, the spread of products from America as well, created a consumer society. And the lure of Western goods was influential in Germany's society during that time. And similarly, there was a growing youth culture. There was a baby boom generation in Germany as well, which, like that in the United States, was outgrowing some of the expectations of their parents. And so we see the consumer society. We also see the growing expression of feminism. Relations between the sexes in Germany were changing in the 60s. More women were joining the workforce, and like in the United States, roles between the genders were beginning to evolve. Another theme with some parallels in the United States was the prominence of the questions about nuclear weapons and the campaign for nuclear disarmament, which is something that many in the country campaigned for in the 1950s and 60s. Others in Germany were motivated by the quest for national unity, which of course had been something that was ripped apart in the aftermath of World War II as the nation was divided into East and West. There were many in Germany who would have preferred the country to be unified, and there came to be a thread of anti-American protest in the midst of this, because it was the United States that had played a key role in the decisions that led to the division of Germany at the end of World War II. At the same time, West Germany was closely tied to the United States in the years after the war, and there was extensive cultural exchange. Many students from West Germany attended American universities and then returned home. So there was direct influence from the United States upon these students, who then returned to Germany with similar expectations for what they had seen going on in the United States. Of course, Germany also struggled with a unique element in its recent history, the prominence of Nazis and their role in World War II and of the Holocaust as well. By 1968, there were many in the country who wanted to reopen studies about what had happened during the Nazi generation. It had been commonplace in the country to just brush all of that under the rug and not want to talk about Nazism and the past at all. By 1968, many wanted to confront these issues from the past and reopen studies which in some ways reopened an interest in Nazism. And so this is part of the clashes in 1968. Those who want to hide from the past, those who want to reopen the past, and in some cases those who want to recreate or relive elements of the past. As in many countries, the protests began to agitate prior to 1968 itself. And beginning in 1967, students in West Germany began to agitate. They were wondering about the extent of freedom that they enjoyed in the so-called free world. They protested against student living conditions, tram fares, and hostile regulations. The protests met with increasing violence from the authorities. In June of 1967, police opened fire on a student protest, killing an innocent student. Protest escalated from there, as now the memory of the martyred student stoked the fires of protest. They objected as much to official indifference to the act as to the violence of the authorities. At the same time, theology students began to question their pastor's sermons, especially when preachers seemed to support the unjust social system. On January 23, 1968, One such pastor called in West German troops to clear his church of students who were questioning his ideas. In this atmosphere of tension, things began boiling over in February. On February 18th, an international congress on Vietnam began at the Free University in West Berlin. The atmosphere was very tense. Anti-war protest had been banned, but students wanted to protest anyway. Some 10,000 people attended the Congress on Vietnam, many anti-war activists. Among many banners and slogans evident was a huge banner with Che Guevara's slogan, "The duty of a revolutionary is to make a revolution." The conference itself revealed a world that was largely united in opposition to American actions in Vietnam. Many wanted to see the United States defeated. Among them was a fiery speaker named Rudi Dutschke, who you see pictured here. In his 30s, he was old for a student, but still popular. His audiences in some cases, though, were cautious about being won over by Dutschke's oratory. Memories of Hitler's demagogy made listeners wary. Dutschke linked the Vietnam War with the struggles of the students. He talked of a long, sustained struggle that would wear down the enemy. The crowd, growing more restless with each speaker, avoided the violence of some of the other clashes we've already discussed in this course. The next morning, a crowd of 20,000 or so gathered, waving banners of Ho Chi Minh and Che Guevara, among others. The marchers sang and chanted in the streets, "Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, Che, Che, Che Guevara." West Germans also had another thing to protest: the actions of their parents' generation during World War II, when many of them contributed to the atrocities of the Third Reich. On February 25th, another scandal came to light when it was revealed that the president of West Germany, formerly an architect, had designed some of the concentration camps. The president denied these allegations, although it wasn't convincing. He managed to hang on for another year in office before resigning in early 1969. In West Germany, the campaign against the student protesters escalated. One of its most vocal opponents was Axel Springer, a press mogul who operated a publishing empire in Germany, including several newspapers. Springer was loyal to American foreign policy and a rabid supporter of the Vietnam War. His papers unleashed a vicious attack against the student protesters, most notably Rudi Dutschke. He was described as a filthy, dirty red, among other insults. He was branded in one headline as public enemy number one. Another urged, "Don't leave all the dirty work to the cops," suggesting that someone should kill Dutschke. In fact, a man named Joseph Bachmann, a 23-year-old out-of-work painter, read those papers every day and developed a vendetta against Dutschke. On April 11th, Bachmann waited for Dutschke outside a drugstore, and when Dutschke appeared, he shot him 3 times in the face and chest. Within hours, students all over the country descended on the offices of the Springer papers. When possible, they attacked the buildings, starting several fires. Eventually, the protests were quelled by police with fire hoses. Still, for a brief moment, there were protests around the world for Rudi Dutschke. Dutschke survived the attack and eventually recovered, and later he received a letter of apology from the press magnate's son. All told, in West Germany, there were 5 days of street battles, 2 killed, and unlike in France, the citizens never fully sympathized with the movement. And so, unlike in France, it didn't become a sweeping nationwide movement that threatened to cripple the government, and rather it ended relatively quietly. In our next lecture, we'll continue our examination of some of the international events of 1968.